The situation had become a harsh reality that I was forced to accept. The more Andrea distanced herself from me, the clearer it became that she wasn't interested in repairing our marriage, despite the occasional moments where she seemed to show doubt. The truth was, she had made her choice, and it didn't include me. As she packed her things, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. What had happened to the love we once shared? Had it all been replaced by the empty promises she now made to herself? The idea of her with other men, trying to find something I couldn't give her, felt like a slap in the face. Yet I knew deep down that I had to let go. When she came by to gather her remaining belongings, the awkwardness was palpable. I had changed the locks, and I made sure to maintain a distance. She still hadn't realized that I wasn't going to let her just walk back into my life after everything she had done. The idea that she could come back better after exploring relationships with other men was absurd to me. It wasn't a form of self-discovery. It was betrayal, plain and simple. Her visit was brief. She was in and out of the house, picking up her things, not even stopping to acknowledge the emotional toll this had taken on me. She was still under the influence of Jessica, someone whose own history of infidelity seemed to be shaping Andrea's decisions. I couldn't help but feel that Jessica had become a catalyst for Andrea's behavior, pushing her further down a path of uncertainty and confusion. When Andrea blushed at the mention of meeting new men, it was clear that her heart was no longer with me. The once tender connection we had now seemed distant, overshadowed by her actions. It was hard to swallow the reality that she was moving on, and I was still clinging to the hope that we might fix what was broken. But the more I reflected, the clearer it became that I had already done everything I could to preserve our relationship. I had been patient, understanding, and loving, but her desire for something else, something beyond the vows we made, had left me with no choice but to let her go. As she walked out the door with her belongings, I stayed behind, processing everything. The house felt emptier than ever, but strangely, there was a sense of relief in knowing that the emotional weight of her infidelity had lifted, even if just a little. It wasn't about getting revenge or trying to punish her, it was about finally taking control of my own life. If she wanted to continue down this path, I would no longer be part of it. I was still processing the pain of my marriage unraveling, but I knew I couldn't remain stuck in the past. The contrast between my neatly kept house and the emotional chaos I felt inside was stark. I tried to distract myself by staying active, joining a cycling group, focusing on my health, and not falling into old habits like drinking to numb the pain. It was clear that Andrea had moved on, and I needed to do the same. When she returned to the house, her curiosity about my life since she left was evident. She was surprised to hear I'd been keeping busy, cycling and meeting new people. She probably expected me to be miserable and wallowing, but instead, I had found a new routine that helped me cope with the hurt. She seemed almost disappointed when I told her about my activities, almost as if she was unsure how to react now that I wasn't clinging to the idea of our relationship. Andrea's decisions were slowly coming back to bite her. She had engaged with 2 men from the club she went to with Jessica, but those relationships didn't last. The men were looking for temporary satisfaction, and once they'd gotten what they wanted, they lost interest. Meanwhile, Andrea's choices had left her isolated, and even Jessica's influence had worn thin. Her relationships with these men, including a trip to the Dominican Republic, only confirmed what I had feared. She was living her life for herself, and I had become irrelevant in it. When her mother confronted her about leaving me, Andrea defended her actions, saying that she needed excitement and attention, things she claimed were missing in our marriage. She was convinced that I still loved her and that we could reconcile once she had had her fun. But I knew better. Her mother's warnings fell on deaf ears, and I was left to pick up the pieces of our shattered marriage. I couldn't let her back into my life, not when she was so sure about her path and her desires. 3 months passed since she left, and I finally reached a point where I was ready to move on. I couldn't keep living the same monotonous routine of work, gym, cycling, and solitude. It was time to break free from the past and try to find new companionship. I had been careful not to rush into anything, not wanting to look desperate or like I was replacing Andrea, but I knew I deserved to be happy again. I asked Diana from the cycling group out on a casual date. We had become friends during our rides, and I figured this would be a good opportunity to see if there was any chemistry between us. She agreed, and we spent the day kayaking and then enjoying a nice dinner at a local restaurant. The relaxed atmosphere was exactly what I needed after all the emotional turmoil, and Diana seemed to enjoy herself too. The evening ended with a surprising kiss that took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting it, but it felt nice to be wanted again, even if it was just a small gesture. It was clear to me that the road to moving on wouldn't be easy, and the wounds from my marriage still stung. But that kiss, the time spent with someone new, was a step toward letting go of what Andrea and I once had. I wasn't ready to completely forget her, but I knew it was time to embrace the possibility of finding happiness again. The story you've shared paints a detailed and emotional narrative about a man's journey through the fallout of his marriage and eventual healing. Initially, he's blindsided by his wife Andrea's infidelity, feeling the deep pain of being left behind for someone else. As the story progresses, he learns to focus on himself, finding solace in cycling, building new friendships, and eventually dating someone new, Diana. Through this experience, he gains perspective and confidence in moving forward, and, after filing for divorce, he uncovers even more about Andrea's actions. Her behavior continues to spiral, and, despite her attempts to return, he makes it clear that the relationship is over for good. The final chapters of the story showcase his personal growth, a fresh start with Diana, and an optimistic future, complete with a new marriage and a baby on the way. The journey from heartbreak to healing, to finding new love, and finally to moving on with clarity is what makes this narrative impactful. The man emerges stronger and more confident, while Andrea's choices lead her down a less fulfilling and complicated path. The message resonates with themes of self-worth, personal growth, and the importance of letting go of toxic relationships. It seems like this could be part of a larger, reflective story on the power of change and resilience after betrayal. Is this the direction you're thinking of taking with your storytelling, or do you want to tweak the themes or characters further? My wife surprised me during our fancy dinner on our 5th anniversary. She told me she wanted to see other people, even though we were married. I felt confused and hurt. I believe if someone wants that, they should discuss it openly or consider divorce. But she didn't agree. She said, "If you really love me, you'll let me do this." I couldn't understand how we had reached this point. I had planned a special dinner with expensive gifts, hoping to make her happy. But instead, she seemed distant and uncomfortable. She kept looking around nervously, avoiding eye contact. Finally, she confessed her desire to have affairs. It was a shock. I didn't know what to say or do. I put my wine glass down, wondering why she seemed so serious. At first, I thought maybe she wanted to talk about starting a family. We had discussed it before, but decided to wait until we were more settled in our careers and had saved more money. Now that we had achieved those goals, I was excited about the idea. But her nervousness and avoiding eye contact worried me. This didn't seem like the usual conversation about starting a family. Usually, someone smiles and looks directly at you for that. But this was different. "I've been thinking a lot," my wife Andrea said with a serious expression. "And it's really important to me. I feel like I need to explore life beyond our relationship." I was completely shocked. A wave of emotions, confusion, bewilderment, and anger crashed over me all at once. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She continued, "I think if I take the time to understand myself better, I'll end up being a better partner for you." I was at a loss, struggling to process her words. "I'm sorry, what?" I interrupted her, placing my hands on the table and looking straight into her eyes, my confusion written all over my face. She turned away, avoiding my gaze. "Rob, I want to be in other relationships," Andrea said. "I want to talk to you about it now, so there are no surprises later." I felt a wave of disappointment as my heart raced. "What do you mean by other relationships, Andrea?" I asked. Her answer was vague. "Maybe different types," she said. I felt even more confused, and it was hard to breathe. I tried to stay calm. "Andrea, are you talking about dating other men? Do you want to be unfaithful and expect me not to mind while you're dating others?" My voice rose, and I suddenly noticed that nearby diners were beginning to listen. "Please, keep your voice down," Andrea whispered urgently. "We don't need everyone eavesdropping on us." At that moment, it hit me. She had chosen a public place to break this news to me, likely to avoid a scene. The realization made me feel sick, twisting my stomach into knots. All I could manage was a confused, "Why? Why do you want to date other men, Andrea?" She replied that she needed space to find herself. I couldn't help but ask, "What do you mean, Andrea? Are you saying you want to be close with other men? Are you thinking of ending our relationship?" She assured me that she wasn't leaving me. She said she loved me deeply and saw a future with me, but she needed time to explore parts of herself she hadn't before. She wanted my permission to do this, promising it was only temporary. She said she would come back to me once she figured things out. This was the last thing I expected to hear during our anniversary dinner. Andrea had shocked me by saying she wanted to be with other men and expected me to agree without question. I was speechless and couldn't think straight. I got up calmly, finished my wine, placed the glass down, and left the restaurant without saying another word. "I don't know where you're going, but I suggest you take a taxi home," I said over my shoulder as I walked out. After leaving, I got in my car, started the engine, and drove aimlessly, my mind clouded by pain and confusion. My head throbbed as the events of the night replayed in my mind. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do. Eventually, I pulled over and slept in the car. When I woke up the next morning, disoriented, I stretched and yawned, desperately hoping it had all been a bad dream. Andrea's insistence on exploring relationships outside of our marriage had shaken me to my core. For years, I believed we were building a life together based on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. Now, her perspective on love and commitment seemed to diverge so drastically from mine that reconciliation felt almost impossible. Throughout the day, I struggled to focus on my work as a forensic auditor. Numbers, reports, and spreadsheets blurred together. My mind was preoccupied with questions about the future, whether I could forgive Andrea, whether we could rebuild our relationship, or whether it was time to move on. By the time I returned home that evening, I had reached a decision. If Andrea truly believed that exploring relationships with other men was necessary for her happiness, then I needed to respect her choices. However, I also needed to respect myself and the boundaries I held sacred in our marriage. "Andrea," I said calmly after walking through the door, "we need to talk." She looked up at me with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "I've been thinking about what you said," I continued, "and while I love you and want the best for you, I can't be part of a relationship that allows for infidelity, even with my permission. It goes against everything I believe in. If this is the path you want to take, then we need to separate." Andrea's eyes welled up with tears. "Rob, I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "But I can't ignore these feelings either." "Then we have to be honest with each other," I replied. "Maybe some time apart will help us figure out what we truly want. If we're meant to be together, we'll find a way. But for now, I think it's best if we go our separate ways." That night, Andrea packed a few things and arranged to stay with her friend Jessica. I moved into the guest room and began researching legal options for separation. It wasn't the outcome I had hoped for when I planned our anniversary dinner, but it felt like the only viable way forward. As painful as this experience was, it taught me an important lesson about the importance of self-respect and standing firm in my values. While I still cared for Andrea, I knew that compromising my principles to save our marriage would only lead to resentment and heartbreak in the long run. In the end, love isn't just about accepting someone as they are, it's also about recognizing when your values and paths no longer align.